And we are live with SML Crunching the Numbers. This is QB Stud, and I've got my man Gramz as our special co-host today. How you doing today, Gramz?
Doing well. How about you?
Doing well. So we've got this special edition, the inaugural edition, really, of Crunching the Numbers. As we come in, we finally have a name. We're ready to go full force with this podcast. I'm excited.
Hold on a second.
Yeah, sure thing, man. What you got?
One of my lamps actually just caught fire.
Why don't you take care of that?
That's awesome.
So, we've got, this is a live show, as you can see. You don't usually plan for anything catching fire, so Gramz is going to be literally putting out some fires, and while that happens, I'm going to be taking us home. Basically, what we're looking at here is, in today's episode... Awesome, so he's back. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at the AFC and NFC and the different divisions. I'm happy to have Gramz with me because he is a part of the NFC while I'm a part of the AFC. That way we have a little bit of back and forth, maybe different perspectives that we can bring. Something I'm excited for, something we're ready to get into. So in the past, I have been very pro AFC. And Gramz, you've been pro NFC, so I'm going to give you first thought on that. What are your thoughts as far as how I've been on different podcasts in the past as far as the AFC and NFC discrepancy, what you thought of then and what you think of now?
Yeah, so I kind of think that both conferences are fairly even, and I really always have. But I feel like I had to play that contrarian there because so many people are just talking about how good the AFC is, when really it's all based off of the same person winning the Super Bowl every year, and him happening to be in the AFC, but the runner-up, Gov, is in the NFC, and he's the only one that's beaten Prime over the last couple of years. So, when you look at it, and Oshie is right there behind Gov. I feel like maybe the top team has been in the AFC, but then the next two have been right behind him in the NFC. And for the most part, I think if you look at the top 10, it's pretty fairly balanced between both conferences.
Yeah, so I would say in seasons past, obviously having the Super Bowl favorite in the AFC has kind of propelled them to be at a much higher standard. That being said, the top 10 was littered with AFC guys, and the top 16 even more so. This season, though, it appears to be a different split, A, because that AFC favorite is kind of in the dumps at the moment, but also B, because there's some real heavy hitters in the NFC that are doing even better than they normally do. So what we're looking at now on the screen is basically the wins expected sheet. We've had a couple of discussions on that, exactly what it means, what these different numbers are, but this is how it's sorted out as far as what their projected wins would be relative to their performance up to this point in the season. So first, before we dive in too deep, I want to give you the opportunity to disagree with anything you see in front of you, and I'd be happy to explain it.
No, I mean, I look at this, and this is kind of close to the list that I think I sent to you earlier today. When I was going through and looking at my list, I was really having a hard time. If you're basing it just on this season and what's happened already, the Chiefs have a lot of really good wins. And I think I may have actually put them number one on my list as well. But the Eagles are right there as well. And if you probably take into account next week, it may bounce them up to number one because they absolutely destroyed me. So I think that's going to give them a little bit of a bump. But I think they're clearly the top two teams right now. And then after that, I think you can make a case for any 6 or 7 teams of the next, the next 6 or 7 teams. I think any of them really could be in the next spot. But right now, it feels like a Chiefs and Eagles Super Bowl is the most likely.
Yeah, so both of those teams are absolutely tearing through everyone in front of them. And like you said, this is only through Week 11. You and Gov, the Eagles, played in Week 12. That's not going to be represented on this sheet here or any of the data we look at today. I want to make sure since Week 12 isn't finished, everyone has had an equal opportunity to try to get those wins in, to try to get those points in so that we're all on a level playing field. So what we're going to do first is we're going to look at some different tables and charts based off of each division. We're going to see how each division fares, and then we're going to compare that to our perceived strengths of the division. I also do have Twitch chat up on my phone with me here, so if you guys have anything that you disagree with, you guys have any any qualms you have with it, please feel free to voice it, and we'll address it. So the first thing we're going to look at is going to be, first off, just the average wins and losses for each team per division. So if we sort it that way here, then what we're looking at is the NFC East is the top division. So let me ask that first. Maybe I should have asked that first. Who do you think is the strongest division in the SML right now?
I've gone back and forth between it being the NFC East at one point. The NFC North is pretty strong, and the AFC South is another one. But I think this year, specifically, it's been the AFC East. That said, I think with the addition of Sunday in the NFC East, not that Gamepad wasn't great, because he was when he was paying attention, but he wasn't paying much attention this year. So I think with Sunday adding into the NFC East is going to be back on top again. Unfortunately, that affects my schedule.
That's right. And so actually, two of the divisions you mentioned, the NFC East and the AFC East, are pitted up against one another. So that's one where they're both going to test each other's might, but also maybe knock each other down a peg or two. So according to just the pure wins and losses through Week 11 of this season of the SML, we do have the NFC East at number 1. We have the NFC North at number 2, which is another one you mentioned, and then that AFC East coming in at the 3rd rank. If you notice,
look at the AFC South down there. I want to call that out. That's really surprising.
And so that's one where you kind of relate it more toward perceived strength. The problem is that you have Dump with the Jags tearing through the league right now, absolutely. But even he has a couple of losses, but then everyone else is basically 4-6 or worse. So that's going to greatly drag down that division, especially when you have Tiny as the only winless team in the SML. That really hurts their standings on this win-to-loss aspect. And it doesn't necessarily represent the actual strength of that division.
Yeah. And, we have it with the Giants in our division, but I'll say the Giants is not an easy victory. He does some things late in games that kind of lets games get away from him. But every time I feel like at halftime we're going in on a one-score game, and I really have to fight. If he's the 31st best team in this league has just really grown from where it was a year and a half ago.
I think you, as Prime would like to say, really hit the nail on the head there, because honestly, every division has that team, if you will, except for one, and that's the NFC North. And that's why I think they're really at that second place, because PJ with the Lions is not a bad player, and he's sitting here at 3-7 with a fairly aggressively negative point differential. So that's really the strength of that division. A, having Oshie there is going to help them a lot, but also B, there's no weaknesses in that NFC North. There's no easy out like there is pretty much in every single other division. So we talked about, the top end. Who do you think it should be toward the bottom of the division power rankings? Who do you have as the weakest division or two in the SML right now?
It's easy to pick on the NFC South, although I will say that they've got a guy in just below the elite to, I don't know what happened last season. But then they have 3 guys after that are right in the middle of the pack. If you put them in any other division, they're probably, a middle of the pack team. So they're all, very, very evenly spread, and they compete against each other and knock each other down. Nobody goes through that division with 6 wins. It's a very interesting division at that. And then I think that the AFC West, if the Chargers really have taken a step back to where they are, that would probably be my second weakest division.
Yeah,
Um,
so just to recap what he mentioned there earlier is the NFC South having Knoll as really a strong team once again this year after a hiatus and being, under par last year, really bringing up that division and not having too many easy outs in there. It's one that's ragged on a lot as one of the weaker divisions, but I agree with you. They have come out all right this season, and I actually would agree that the AFC West, if you removed the Chiefs and put in just a great team instead of a team that's playing out of their mind, it would easily be the worst division. It's going to be arguable there for me. And also, the same thing to say about the NFC West. You've got guys
yeah, I
like,
could see that too.
yeah, you've got
You
guys
know what's
like,
interesting too? I was just thinking about it because I really, I've had a lot of tough divisional games, and then I've had a lot of, having to play Oshi or having to play Future in the regular season because you line seeds and whatnot. But the only division that I've played against that I've lost to two teams in a season was actually the NFC South. So I guess I can't make fun of them too much. I lost to both Null and to NYT that year.
yeah, it's definitely a division where any one of those four teams can beat just about anybody. The problem is they don't show up every week, and so they're going to get trashed for it.
Yeah, I mean, you saw NYT beat Meats last year. It was the only loss,
That's
but I'm
right.
sure he got up for that game.
Oh, absolutely. And you wanted to get that 17-0. He may not have played all of his guys the entire game, but I know they all saw action, and so that's one where he wanted it, NYT wanted it, and NYT took it off of him, and they're capable of doing that week in and week out. Now, that's just one way to look at it, though. That's kind of the wins and losses. There's not a whole lot of context because every win is sure it's worth the same. Everyone's got 16 games. You play to win the game, all that good stuff. That being said, not every win is the same. It's not every win is as easy to come by another. So we've got a couple of other different, ways to come up with different rankings, and we're going to see how they compare to our perceptions, as well as how they compare just to the win-loss records. So the first one that we're going to look at is going to be the adjusted performance points per game ranking. So that is a metric that I actually unveiled last week on this show, where essentially what it does is it evaluates your performance in a game, whether it be a win or a loss, based off of the quality of the opponent and the quality of your performance. It's on a scale, essentially the average, you can actually see here, the average right now is about 54. More often than not, the average is somewhere between 50 and 55. So if you're in those lower 50s, you're basically playing average football. So
I'll throw that out right now because I'll take any of the top three teams over the NFC South, and they're ahead of the NFC East. So this metric's bunk.
Yeah, so Gramz has been a major lover of this metric, but I'll explain why you've had issues with it here in just a second, and then I think we'll either make you feel a little better or we'll just let you show your bias toward it. But if we look at this metric, first off, what it shows is that the NFC North has actually been the best performer in the SML, which again, that kind of relays back to what I talked about earlier, where you have just four teams firing on all cylinders. There's no easy out. Now you
Now,
could
who are they
obviously,
matched up against this year? They're matched up against the South, obviously, in the NFC. Who are they matched up in the AFC? The West?
I'm not sure. We can actually go back and try to look at their previous games and find out right quick because that's a good question. It looks like AFC West.
AFC West and NFC South, which were two of the weaker divisions I called out earlier.
Absolutely. And so they could very easily be feasting off of those two lesser divisions and thus for, look a little bit better. But this metric does kind of take that into account. Now you could say because they're all average teams that you beat up an average team pretty aggressively, that helps you. And you could be okay there. You could be on a spot. But I also want to point out the second team very, very close to that top division is the AFC East, who have the NFC East and the AFC West, I think, as well. So that AFC West is a repeat, if you will, but the NFC East is definitely no cupcake, and they're just right there neck and neck with those three solid teams at the top of the AFC East.
I've watched you guys play. I've played against you now. Your division is definitely not a cakewalk. It's probably missing that like top three team in it, but you guys have three or four guys in that next tier.
And actually, you brought up something I wanted to bring up later, but it's a good time to bring it in now. The AFC East really is one of the only top divisions that doesn't have that top 3 or 4 team. Maybe not even a top 5 team. But the fact that we're still up there, we're still so dangerous, tells you exactly how deep this division is. We may end up with a 3 seed up there. We may end up with a 4 seed, but I promise you it's not going to be like a certain division that usually ends up at the 4 seed in the NFC and is just a cakewalk for whatever wild card gets them. AFC East is dangerous. It's not fun to play in. At the same time, though, if you're a competitor, you love those tight games. So really, you have the NFC North and the AFC East by far and away the top 2 divisions by this metric. And then we're going to go...
Actually, you touched on something else. I don't know that a 3 or 4 seed has won a game in the NFC playoffs yet this year.
Yeah, it's...
I think they may be winless. It's at most 1 win, but I think they may be winless.
And so how often is that 2 NFC East teams that come into those wildcard spots and feast up on the other divisions?
It's been that sometimes. I think there's been a season or 2 where it's been a team from another division made it in, but the wildcards have definitely run the show in the NFC.
Yeah, so that's something where you may have a team that's a little hungry. Maybe they're coming after the bits. Maybe it's just because the NFC East is nasty. But I have noticed that those non-bye week playoff seeds are a little weaker generally in the NFC, which was part of my arguments in the past as to why the AFC is actually stronger. So we look at it here. If we look at the rest of the divisions after those top 2, essentially the rest of these divisions are all below average. So I'm going to defend this by saying essentially the entire NFC South is completely average. They have no one that's really bringing them down except for the Saints, but Noel is making up for that very easily. That's what puts them up this high. Whereas if you look at other teams like the NFC West, Spooky's a good player. He hasn't been playing well. He's going to be dragging them down. The Rams started off hot, but they've started to kind of regress. They've got different guys in that NFC West, like the Cardinals, for example, that just dropped off a cliff and are no longer providing that quality team. Same thing with the AFC South. Tiny's going to bring them down very aggressively, along with slumping Prime. And the AFC West, outside of the Chiefs, has been beyond disappointing. So we talk about the NFC South, maybe one of the weaker divisions, yet they're sitting here at number 3. I would argue that the rest of these divisions are definitely hurting as well, and they're not necessarily playing good football. When they do win, it's a small win against a team that really they should have blown out. Everyone else is really taking care of business up here at the top.
Yeah.
Okay, so, just a little metric here, looking at it for the average ranking for the AFC and the NFC actually takes the cake on this new metric, so maybe that'll help you warm up to it just a little bit. Yeah, so what that's saying is the NFC on average has been more impressive than the AFC, if you will.
Yeah, but I mean that's way too large of a sample size. Everybody playing against each other. That metric kind of doesn't very much.
Yeah, it's not made for that, but it's always interesting to look at.
Yeah, it's not going to fluctuate too much.
Right. So we look over here now. If we just look at rankings based off of projected wins, so again, this is going to be off of the wins expected sheet. What we have is we actually have a tie here at second place between the AFC North and the NFC North, with the NFC East taking the top. Now, we talked about earlier how we both think the NFC East is probably the cream of the crop in the SML. They have the best win-loss record as well. So that's where the sheet really lines up with perception as well as performance. And we're following up actually by the AFC North. So there we've got Meats, who's been doing very well. The Steelers has been strong since that new owner took over.
Woods has had a bounce-back season this year, too. I mean, he's done well, so I see that division definitely on the rise.
Absolutely, and that's especially when you look at, you have Rowan, who's a good user, but has just been performing very, very under par. So I'm happy with the AFC North sitting there at number 2, tied with that NFC North, which we said was top with that other metric. So that's another very, very impressive team. The top half of the league is brought up by the AFC East. I think that comes down to what you mentioned earlier. There's no elite team in the AFC East, so I think that's going to suffer, or that's going to make the division suffer a little bit when it comes to rankings like this. The NFC South, again, what I'm attributing this to is they are the model of mediocrity. They're all basically average guys, except for Noel, who's been playing a little better to pick up the slack of ZZ. Seeing them around the middle, I'm okay with. The AFC West, outside of the Chiefs, have just really disappointed. Unless you look at the Raiders, which we haven't talked about the Raiders a lot. He's been playing 500 football. He's really playing over and above our expectations for him as an individual. but not necessarily for the SML as a whole, if that makes sense.
And then, did the algorithm break on the AFC South because they were just that bad this year?
Yeah, see, I'm not sure because the AFC South is definitely playing down way below par. They're in at the 7th division here. The Colts not bringing them up and letting Dump really shoulder the entire load by himself is hurting them big time.
But I don't see an average position for them on the sheet.
Oh, an average position? They're right here. They're here at 7. Oh, you're talking about over here?
Yeah.
They're over here around 18. I think it was actually...
Oh, okay. I thought that the two were the same. Gotcha.
It was 18.3 was their average position.
Okay.
That's why they're all the way over here to the right. Now I see what you're saying is, yeah, so they're just below the AFC West and NFC South. So, again, you want to talk about how the NFC South being up there at 5, it's barely 0.3 positions away from being the 7th. So, really, the bottom half is all very, very close to being average. Let me undo that. And then finally at the end, the NFC West. Again, if you take out Future, who got really demolished in his big games, if we're being real, the NFC West has been vastly disappointing across the board. And I would even include Future in that. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I don't know about Future because I almost get the point that he might now be in that like I can coast through the regular season.
Mm-hmm.
Because the guy that I played a couple of weeks ago was not the same Future that I expect to get when I play against him. And I've seen some of the other teams that he's lost to, and usually he'll lose a couple of tough games, but he's beating everyone else and pretty handedly. And this year he kind of slipped up a little bit in the middle of the season. I was a little surprised by that.
It very well could be coasting, just like you said. My primary concern would be he hasn't been a juggernaut in the playoffs. He really needs to do what he can in the regular season to best position himself to get to that 1 to that 2 seed. Because like you said before, the 3 and the 4 seed often gets knocked out. So that's something that I'm going to be looking at as we head toward down the stretch. If he can regain that bye week and get that extra round in the playoffs under his belt before he potentially faces an early out.
Yeah. I want to touch on something that Mike said. Yes, I'm absolutely in a closet. I'm in a closet that was made for podcasting. I decorated a little bit because my wife uses this for a couple of her shows, but I had to bring a little bit of my own flair to it. So I see that Prime is just seeing that now. So that's some of my own decorations. That's not for my wife's podcast.
I was going to say, yeah, your wife has interesting taste with the decoration, but that's good. So the other thing I wanted to point out, so we look at the rankings, right? 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, since we had a tie at 2. If you look at the average position, it's going to tell you a couple of things. At the top 3 divisions, NFC East, NFC North, and AFC North, they're very, very close together, and they're far away from the rest. Then you've got a small drop-off for that AFC East, where, again, they're really just an elite team away. If one of those teams takes off and becomes a top 3 team, top 5 team, then that division's really going to be dangerous. And then you've got, the jumble at 18, where you've got just a bunch of average teams, average divisions, and then that NFC West that we talked about, where maybe Future's not playing up to his full abilities, and they're really down in the dumps.
Yep. Yeah, it's definitely a down season for that division.
All right, so if we want to take that as a big picture, as a whole, and compare it for conferences, what we look at here is obviously the true average. You're going to look at it to being around 16, since that's the middle of the SML, right? So both the AFC and the NFC more or less come out to 16 being the average. What that tells us is exactly what you mentioned earlier. Really, the AFC and the NFC are very, very similar in strengths. I think the AFC at the very top is going to be able to handle the NFC at the very top. Then so you got your...
Yeah, see, I disagree with that. I would say and they're not doing it this year, but the team that everybody fears to play is the Colts. But I would take Oshie and Gov in any game after the Colts. So to say at the top tier, I disagree.
Yeah, and you know what? That's fair, because we actually have a little bit of evidence to back that. Oshie and the top team projected in the league, Haas and the Chiefs, did square off. And if I recall correctly, that game was a 28-14 win for the Bears. I can actually double check this. Yeah, so a 28-14 victory for Oshie and the Bears over the Chiefs. So really the cream of the crop from the NFC did go up against the cream of the crop for the AFC, and the NFC kind of blew them out a little bit. So that does attribute to what you say, but if we consider the elite being just the top four, I think those top four can fight the top four of the NFC. But I would probably say, against what this sheet says, that Oshie would be number one, and I actually have Gov at number two, with Chiefs and Jags coming up right behind them.
Yeah, and I think your other problem is when you're comparing the 1 to 4 seeds as opposed to the top 4 teams in the playoffs. And, there is a difference there, or the top 4 teams in the conference.
And that's fair.
When you have divisions that are a little bit not evenly weighted.
Such as the NFC East, because you've got yourself and Gov, only one of you can be in that top 4 when really you're both top 5 teams overall in the SML. So I like that. That's a good point as well.
And I think this season, the third team in the AFC East would probably be a wildcard team if they were in a different division.
I completely agree with that. And unfortunately, that may be me, that may be Royce, but it's definitely something where we're hurt, because we have to play each other in the AFC East, but also we have to play you bastards in the NFC East. So definitely not working out for anybody that's on here. I see Haas says bulletin board material. Good. You lost to Oshie. You got blown out by Oshie. I did watch that game. Make sure you show up if you end up in big games down the line. Make sure you represent the AFC, because right now you and Dump are the cream of the crop, and it's going to be one of you two. I want to see it happen. Make sure that Simbardi stays in the AFC.
And Colts, I got you as a solid 7 seed in the AFC. You're going to get there. You're going to get close, but no cigar. Take a seat. Watch us play.
Yeah, so as we've got a few minutes left, we had a late start today for the show. We've got a few minutes left to try to maintain that sweet mark of 30 minutes. I do want to talk about the playoff picture. So you sent me your playoff picture earlier. I don't have it in front of me. Do you have that information on you, what you have your projected playoff teams to be?
Yeah, I could pull it up. And in the NFC, I had Oshie getting the 1 seed, mainly because he really handles his division, and I just don't see him getting too many more losses.
Mm-hmm.
I had Gov and the Eagles getting the 2 seed, because his schedule from here on out is really just not that tough. I had the Seahawks at number 3. Again, takes care of his own division. There's not much to worry about there. Mm-hmm. And then I had the Bucks at 4. The Cowboys at 5, and the Redskins at 6. I really actually struggled with these last 3 teams. I could see myself being the 6th seed. I think if I lose out, I may still make the playoffs at this point. Mm-hmm. And losing out is a real possibility. So it's going to depend on how I do against the Redskins as to how we end up. But I put us for a split, in which case I had him at the 6th. If I beat him both times, I think actually Lawyer Killer will probably get in with the 6th. So should be interesting to see at the bottom of the NFC. And then with the AFC, I had... Actually, you want to go over your NFC first, and then we'll do the AFC?
Honestly, I have the exact same NFC as you do, so I'm not going to... You did a good job of kind of fleshing that out and explaining, your reasoning for it. I think that if Sunday came in earlier in the season, he would have that 5th or 6th seed on lock, but... Lawyer is one that can catch fire, and he could come on a tear at last second. It's just that he was in position to control that 6th seed, and he's lost since then.
Yeah, he kind of gave it back a little bit.
That's right.
I played him in Primer recently, and I could tell he caught a little bit of that fire, but it seems like he maybe lost a little bit of it.
That's right. All right, go ahead with your AFC.
So the AFC, I've got the Chiefs at number 1, and we talked about strength of division. There, no surprise. Mm-hmm. I've got Ravens at number 2. He's been fairly consistent. There's a little bit of a switch there because I think I would have had Bills there before seeing the last game that the Bills played. But I got the Bills at 3, the Jags at 4, mainly because I think that Prime is going to take down the Jags the next time they play and make a run at the playoffs. It's going to be very close. I got the Pats at 5, and I've got the Browns at 6. Though I will say that those 5 and 6 teams should watch out for the Colts because I could see Prime running the table, and at 10 and 6, that might just be enough. I'm kind of going on the premise that 10 and 6 won't get him in, but we'll see.
Yeah, so that's going to be dangerous, right? I have a very similar layout, except I actually have the Patriots as the 6th seed and the Browns as the 5th seed. Just the remainder for the Patriots schedule for my schedule is disgusting. Have both the Cowboys, yourself, and the Eagles, 2 of the top 5 teams in the league. We've got the Giants, which should be a win, but that's another team that's pretty dangerous. Field and the Texans, which can beat anybody. And then a division opponent to end off the season. Could very easily see an additional 2 losses, which would put me at 5 losses. But that's, assuming that I play great football for the rest of the season. Even then, I can still end up with those extra 2 losses and 11-5. Whereas Woods, I believe he has the Ravens left on his schedule. And that's really it as far as top teams. He just came off of a strong victory against Future. So I actually expect him to lose only maybe 1 game left and gain control of that 5th seed, but ultimately leaving the Colts out to dry as the 7th seed.
Yeah, I could see that. And like I said, I could also see the Colts getting in, and I could see the Packers getting in the NFC. I think that those are the first teams out.
Yeah, so I actually reached out to Woods after we played. We played recently a couple weeks ago, and I told him, I said, we need to band together and keep Prime out of the playoffs. Let's give someone else a shot. And I think he and I are both committed to that. So, Woods, if you're watching, we got to get after it. We got to keep that bad man out of it so he doesn't touch anybody like he has been. All right. Anything else that you want to? We're coming in on that 30 minutes. Anything else you want to say to the audience? Anything to close us out?
No, I mean, I would have liked to have gone over my power rankings. Maybe I'll post them in the chat because I did give some thought to them. I actually looked at team schedules upcoming. I know that some people in the lesser podcasts usually have to look that up during the show and, who do they have remaining? I kind of did that ahead of time. So I did, some prep work. Then my co-host let me down by not showing up on time. So we look like idiots, but maybe I'll post that in the chat.
Just run through it real fast.
No, I don't want to rush it in. We'll go over the 30-minute line and get, all right, fine. Hold on.
There you go. That's the spirit.
I've got at number 1, I've got the Eagles, but mine were based off of the last week, not the same as the sheet. And he had a big win against me.
Mm-hmm.
I had the Kansas City Chiefs at 2, the Ravens at 3, the Bears at 4, the Jaguars at 5, the Bills at 6. Those 2 teams I separated based on the fact that the Jags actually just won a close game against the Bills.
Correct.
Then I had my Cowboys at 7, the Bucks at 8, the Pats at 9, Browns at 10, Seahawks 11. I know his record says better, but I think, he, like you said, he's kind of lost to everybody with a winning record.
Mm-hmm.
The Redskins at 12, Jets at 13, Packers at 14, Texans at 15, Colts at 16. Again, separating those 2 because the Texans just beat the Colts.
Average. Go ahead.
Yeah. Then the Broncos, Falcons, Panthers, Cardinals. I got the Cardinals a little higher up than your algorithm. I see that. Man, they fell down.
Mm-hmm.
Then the Vikings, Steelers, Lions, Raiders, Giants, Rams, Bengals, 49ers, Dolphins, Saints, Chargers, and Titans. Some of those teams, I write them down. I'm like, Chargers is not a 28th team. It doesn't make sense. But, what's the line? Your record is what it says you are. So
that's right.
What they are here.
And just one more thing. Where did you have Mike and the Panthers at? Like 20, thereabouts?
Yeah, probably right in the middle, Yeah,
I just want to make sure because I put him at 20 prior. And everyone gave me a lot of flack because, he's not a 20th best team. But, it's just good to see some other 19, opinions.
So a little higher than you.
Okay, 19. Well, the sheet has him at 18, so haha, there we go. All right, go ahead and there's Mike. I was waiting for him to show up in the chat. So thank you very much for coming on. Again, any last words before we sign off?
No, just think about how tough I am. My light bulb went on fire in the middle of this. I just put it in the middle of the room. It's still smoking over there, and gonna go deal with that now.
Hey, that's mental fortitude and strength. Gramz,
it stinks in here.
Always a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for coming and being co-host with me. Always a pleasure. This is QB Stud with my boy Gramz signing off. Thank you guys for coming, and good to see you.